Are aliens coming from other worlds to abduct us? Stories have been around for quite some time. This week, the Jackalopes will explore some of the oldest recorded alien abduction stories. I'm Floyd Whiting.
I'm Aaron Linden.
I'm Steve Sisson.
And I'm Emmy Whiting.
And we are your Jackalopes. This week, we're going to take a look at some of the oldest alien abduction stories that have been recorded. Some of them go back a lot farther than what you would think. But I decided to take on the story of Barney and Betty Hill, which kind of kicked off the alien abduction story. I don't want to call it a craze, but it was the first really popular one that kind of reached around through the entire nation. And there's a lot to it, so I will get to it. On September 19th, 1961, in New Hampshire, Barney and Betty were driving home from a vacation that they decided to cut short due to a hurricane being forecasted in the coming days. Barney was 39, Betty was 41 at the time. To ensure that they got home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire safely, they decided to drive on through the night. Although the storm was on the way, the night they were driving was still clear. Just south of Lancaster, at approximately 10:30 p.m. on a backcountry road, they noticed a light in the sky. Barney thought it was a satellite. Betty initially thought it was a falling star, but the object began to kind of move in very strange, erratic ways. The couple stopped a few times on the way to take a good look at this thing because Barney kept a pair of 7x50 binoculars in the car. Now, Barney then kind of started to insist that this was an airplane. He thought, it's either got to be an airplane or a satellite, something like that. But then it began to move more erratically, and it passed in front of the moon. As it passed in front of the moon, Betty realized it was cigar-shaped and a lot closer than they initially thought it was. It had a series of blue, red, amber, and green lights flashing in a pattern across the body. Betty shared that she believed it was a UFO, and Barney still insisted that it was some sort of man-made aircraft. But he later admitted that it was about at this point he began to grow a little concerned because he started to develop an overwhelming sense of being watched. And they had a little dog with them in the car, and this dog began to whine at about that time.
Poor baby.
Yeah.
Right.
The object then went behind a mountain, and it emerged into view again. But now it started to actually come towards them, which, I mean, if you're back on a country road, it's just you and your wife or you and me, and we've got this object in the sky that we can't identify. There are no cell phones. This is 1961. We're out there alone. I'm growing uneasy at this point.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, of course.
Barney kept a pistol in the car in the trunk. He got out, got his pistol. And I would have too, because it's like, I don't know what this thing is. So they passed a hotel.
I love that the answer, though, is always a pistol.
I'm going to get my gun. I'm going to get
Shoot
my
the
gun.
aliens. Shoot the ghosts.
Shoot the ghost.
Shoot them all.
So the thing of it, like, they're passing, or they passed a hotel, and I kind of always thought, why didn't they stop? But again, we have to think about, we don't know what this is in the sky. This could be anything. And it's still quite a ways out there. It's not like coming up to us or anything. It's just moving weird, oddly, right? There is a storm coming. I have got to get us home. So I would have pressed on too, because they passed this hotel. They thought about it, but they're like, we got to get moving, man. This all started happening at 10:30, and he didn't expect them to be home until about 3 a.m. So we're driving through the night here. So it was not long after they passed the hotel that the object descended to only a few hundred feet in the air. This is about the time I'd be like, so
you want to go?
Sounds pretty.
Yeah, you want to go back to the hotel at this
because
point?
then it moved in front of them, and Betty could see the object even better now. and she said it glowed with a white light and appeared to be making some sort of spinning motion.
Mm-hmm.
She took the binoculars and she held them up, and kind of to her horror, she suddenly realized that it wasn't spinning, although it looked like it was, because now she could see 2 rows of windows that were just, not spinning around in circles. And so now you're looking through these windows. She couldn't see anything in them, but she's like, there's windows on that thing. Betty convinced Barney to actually pull over at this point. She's like, you got to take a look at this, man. So the object was now only the distance of about 2 or 3 city blocks away and 2 treetops high. So it's getting close. Barney could now see that the object looked like a large glowing pancake, is the way that he described it, with 2 bright red lights
I'm so hungry.
on either side.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, pancake.
Who has the nearest glowing pancake?
I'd love a glowing pancake, please.
And he would later say that at this point, he realized that this object was bigger than a jetliner. Like the size of it really started to kind of settle in.
Yeah.
The object then made a very sudden arc-like movement, coming to only a few hundred feet in front of him. And he could now see pretty intricate details of this thing. The craft hovered over a field, and they were stopped by this point. So he decides to do what, honestly, I would decide. He walks towards it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He's like, what is this thing?
100%.
Yeah.
I'm going to get a good look.
I'm not, but you guys have fun.
Yeah, I'll record you.
I'm going to go taste the glowing pancake.
Absolutely. Throw me the maple syrup, baby.
I'm a pancake observer, not a pancake taster.
But I mean,
Well,
we
if it
also
was a
have
pancake.
to think about. We also have to think about this is 1961. Yes, UFOs were a thing then, right? Like Betty's sister, by this point, had already said that she saw a UFO in the sky, and Betty, even though like she wasn't a UFO, ologist or anything like that, and not an aficionado, she knew that people were seeing objects in the sky.
Right.
She's not the one walking up to this thing. Her husband, who's been pretty much insisting that this is a logical explanation, is the one walking towards this object. She yells at him, like you would. What the hell are you doing, you moron?
Yeah. Get back in the car.
Get back in the car. We're going home.
Yeah. I don't remember what you were. Oh, you were trying to do something. We were camping, and we were throwing sticks in the creek.
Yeah, in the creek.
Because it was so fast,
Right.
And so we were just throwing like big old branches in and seeing it just go down the creek,
Because I'm a 10-year-old.
But then,
Well, right.
but then he got one stuck, and he wants to, stand on this very shaky log.
With rapidly moving water.
Yes.
I could have got it.
I
No.
don't doubt you.
I could have got it.
You could not have.
It could have got you.
Yeah, but anyway, I was
coulda got
screaming at him. I'm like, no. Speaking to him like the dogs.
Yeah,
I'm like,
leave
no.
it. Leave it.
No.
The woman is always the voice of reason in these situations.
She
Always.
takes her keys out. Hey, buddy.
Come on.
So Betty's doing this from inside the car. Essentially.
Yeah.
Leave it. Leave the car.
I have jerky.
Totally plausible. Yeah.
But Barney's not. She's like, she later said it was like he couldn't hear her. And he said
What's new?
Yeah.
Some things never change.
he said he never actually heard her yell at him. So he just continues to walk towards this thing. Now, Barney noted that although the lights were really brilliant at this point, he said there was no light that hit the ground. So like with a flashlight, you pointed at something and the light hits it. He said nothing hit the ground. It was just the object.
It's almost like a glow versus emitting light.
But I mean, it's not making the area, it's not lighting up the area around it. It's not causing attention. And I got to thinking to myself, what would a gravity engine do?
Yeah, right.
It would make an object look like it's spinning if it's on low, right? If we could see it at all. But it would also be able to contain a light. So how did he see it, though? But
Right.
this is alien tech. We
Right,
have no
right.
idea.
Sorry, my stomach is actually growling.
Okay, so
Pancake talk.
he's
It's a
walking.
pancake.
He's walking up to the object, and the craft descended at this point. And Barney raised his binoculars again, and he said he saw approximately 10 people, human-like beings, watching them from within, wearing what he described as like glossy black uniforms and caps with what looked like to Barney to have bells on them. So again, you know, I said this about other abduction things. If you don't know what you're looking at, you use whatever's close, right? You're
right.
like, this looks like a seatbelt
Those
Yeah.
or whatever.
aliens will be there with bells on.
With bells on, baby. And he realized now that the two red lights that were at the end were actually at the end of these two large fins that came out of the initial object. So Barney said all of a sudden, all but one figure turned their back on him and walked to the opposite wall and started playing with switches and buttons. And he said that the one that didn't move stared at him intently.
The Watcher.
And Barney suddenly knew. He went into a panic. He's like, he suddenly knew. They're here to get us. They intend to capture us. So he turns around and runs back to the car. The craft descends even farther, and he said what looked like a ladder started to descend. And so he's booking it, right? He's out of there. And he did admit that at this point, his memory starts to go pretty fuzzy. He starts having trouble remembering, well, was it a ladder? Was it, he's like, having a rough time. But he remembered very, very clearly the slanted eyes that stared at him. And he knew they're going to capture us. So he jumps into his car, fires this thing up, and he's like, we're out of here.
He's like, Betty, you were right.
Yeah.
I should have listened to Betty.
Yeah, right.
Once again. And he kept yelling at her, they're going to capture us. They're going to capture us. So they take off. They awaken the car, neither remembering anything. But they're fuzzy. And they're like, what is going on? So they don't speak for a long time. The car is going a normal pace. There's no object. Their watches had stopped.
Ooh,
And their watches,
classic.
their watches never ran again. They arrived home almost 2 hours later than they should have. Barney initially thought, we're going to get there at 3 a.m. They got there at 5 a.m. They get out of the car, they go inside, and they start to discuss this object that they had seen. And then they kind of put it from their minds. Because if I remember correctly, she wanted to talk about it. Barney was like, okay, we're done.
From what I remember about that, it was that way
Yeah,
too.
where he was like, okay, it happened to us. We saw it. We're not going to tell anybody.
Right.
And to him, that was, we're done. Until Betty started having nightmares. Okay.
Ooh.
And an astronomer, Walter N. Webb, based out of Boston, met with the Hills on October 21st of 1961. And for 6 hours, the Hills related what they could remember about this encounter. Barney said that he developed a mental block and that he suspected that they were some portions of the event that Barney felt he chose not to remember. Where he's like, I don't think I want to
Well, and
do
that's
this.
a very common trauma response.
Absolutely.
You know,
I don't
people block
want to
things
Right.
out. Yeah.
So, I mean, here's Barney, very reluctant in this whole process of revealing and talking about it. Betty's kind of the one who's like, we gotta say something. We have to do it. Plus, she's the one who starts to get flooded with these nightmares that are happening to her. And she describes them as extremely vivid, very clear. But I'm sure Barney wanted to support his wife, but he's like, okay, yep, let's just calm down with it. Don't go around telling your friends that this
Right.
happened to us. And okay, so Barney described in detail all that he could remember about the craft and the appearance of the somehow not human figures that he had seen aboard it. Webb stated later that, quote, they were telling the truth, and the incident probably occurred exactly as reported, except for some minor uncertainties and technicalities that must be tolerated in any such observations where human judgment is involved. Exact time and length of visibility, apparent sizes of objects and occupants, distance and height of objects.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's always hard to tell. You don't have nothing to compare it to.
Right.
So, you know,
So you're sitting
Well,
there
and
going,
it's dark. It's the middle of the night. You're like, is it 50 feet away? Is it 100 feet
yeah,
away?
you can't. You don't know how big
know.
it is, so you can't tell.
And by
And
the
don't
time
even ask me how old they are, because I could not tell. I could not begin
I'm really
to
bad with
guess.
age.
I'm really bad with age.
So the nightmares go for 5 nights in a row, and then all of a sudden they just stop. So Betty's like, you know what? I'm going to do my own little bit of therapy. And she starts writing these down of what she remembers. In one dream, she and Barty encountered a roadblock, and men surrounded the car. She lost consciousness, and she struggled to regain it. Then she realized that she was being forced by 2 small men to walk into the forest at night. And seeing Barney walking behind her, she calls out to him, but he seemed to be in a trance, or he was sleepwalking. He's not responding to her at all.
Much like he didn't when he was walking towards it.
Right. So the men, she said, stood about 5 feet high and wore matching blue uniforms with caps similar to those worn by military cadets at the time. They appeared nearly human, with black hair, dark eyes, prominent noses, and bluish lips, but their skin was a grayish color. She and Barney were taken to the car where the leader suggested that they wait to watch the craft's departure. They did so and then resumed their drive home.
Okay.
Under hypnosis with Dr. Benjamin Simons, because people are now like, well, maybe you guys have got repressed memories here. So let's go put you under. And Dr. Simons is considered one of the best at the time. Like, this guy is good at getting these memories out that you can't remember.
Right.
Barney reported that the binocular strap had broken when he ran from the UFO back to the car. He recalled driving the car away from the UFO, but afterward felt irresistibly compelled to pull off the road and drive into the woods. He eventually sighted 6 men standing on a dirt road. The car stalled, and 3 men approached the car. Barney described the beings as generally similar to Betty's. He said the beings stared into his eyes with terrifying, mesmerizing effect, and that under hypnosis, Barney said, quote, "Oh, those eyes, they're there in my brain. And I was told to close my eyes because I saw 2 eyes coming close to mine. And I felt like those eyes had pushed into my eyes. And all I see are these eyes. I'm not even afraid that they're not connected to my body. They're just there. They're just up close to me, pressing against my eyes." Betty reported a conversation with the leader in English. And Barty said that he'd heard them speaking in a mumbling language that he did not understand, and that Betty also mentioned this detail. They were mumbling amongst each other. The few times that they actually communicated with Barney, he said they did thought transference. This is well before the word telepathy went around.
Right.
He felt that they were putting words into his brain, like he knew what they wanted without having to say anything. These folks would go on to record these hypnosis sessions, and I've listened to a few of them today, matter of fact. And I read that pretty lightly. If you listen to these recordings, they're terrifying.
I can
Yes.
imagine.
They are terrifying recordings.
So, from what I remember about this case, isn't there at some point they talk about some sort of surgery?
I didn't find anything on that, but I mean, I was going off of like 4 or 5 different sources.
Right,
and
right.
Now, what did you find? Because that's
From what I remember, it's been years since I've actually listened to anything about this case, but it is my favorite because a lot of abduction cases, I believe there's aliens, obviously. That's something I believe. But the abduction cases get a little kooky crazy. A little kooky crazy for me, but this one I genuinely believe this happened.
now I can't remember which interviewer it was. Okay, but one of the interviewers came forward and admitted, I tried to flub them up 6 or 7 times.
They have
Sure.
always just stood true
Yep.
to what happened to them.
Interviewing him separately,
Yes.
trying to make, oh, well, she said that,
See, isn't that weird though? Like that's the whole Travis Walton and the crew thing. I mean, they
Right.
all had the story. They all stuck to the story. It's always, that they're just they'll die telling
On that
that
hill.
story.
Yeah.
Because it happened to them. It's
Yes.
At least they believe it happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe it happened to them.
Yes.
Now, see, a lot of people.
The
Go ahead.
surgery, sorry. From what I remember, again, it's been years, so I could be misremembering, so don't quote me. But there was something with Betty where there was like something inserted into her abdomen.
So there's when they got home, Barney later said, I felt a compulsion to inspect my groin.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm gonna leave that one there.
yeah. So they get
I do too. It's okay.
they
We're all 13 years old. Here.
You just gotta look at it every once in a while.
they got home and he felt a compulsion to actually inspect it. Betty kind of the same. Betty said she didn't know why, but she felt compelled to throw away all the food that they'd taken with them on the trip. Her dress, which was brand new, was ripped in a couple different places, and she doesn't remember where those rips came from. I didn't find anything on the dog, which really could, was the dog just waiting there? Like,
Right?
maybe that's the greatest eyewitness,
Yeah.
The poor baby.
The poor dog's just like, where are you guys going with those light guys?
Yeah, if only the dog could speak, he would
Yeah.
have the entire account,
Absolutely.
start to finish,
Yeah.
details and everything.
Now, some other people have come forward later on in life, and not later on in life, but even kind of recently, and they said, look, this, because of the way that they described the individuals. One thing that we haven't gone into is that Barney was a black man.
Mm-hmm.
Betty was a white woman. This is 1961.
That's a big deal.
People
That-
have come forward saying, look, this wasn't an alien abduction. This was something worse. This
Yeah.
was racism on a backcountry road that may have involved a couple horrible different kinds of assault
Yeah.
that they, in their trauma, have turned into this.
Which could totally be the case.
I don't know, but
But, again, with the stories being so similar,
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
versus them each coming up with their own kind of
well,
what
and
they think happened. But,
I couldn't confirm this.
mhm.
But when Barney finally said, okay, fine, I'll tell somebody, he went to the Air Force Base. And that's where it all kind of started going crazy because the individuals at the Air Force Base really wanted to talk to them. They were
Oh, I'm
very,
sure.
yeah, they were very eager to talk to them. And the thing that I can't confirm, but I have heard, is that the reason why they really wanted to talk to them was because that Air Force Base picked up an unidentified flying object at 1:30 a.m. that night, flying around that area. And so when the folks came in and started talking, all of a sudden the Air Force was like, yeah, come on in. Let us get you some coffee. Let's really sit down and talk here, But they're also the ones who tried to flub them up. They're the ones who tried to, okay, now I'm going to get her story. Now I'm going to get his story. And there's interview techniques interrogation
Yeah.
Right.
techniques
Yeah.
that you can
Exactly.
use, especially with more than one individual,
Mm-hmm.
to get them over and over, and that's one of the things. You see it all the time. People are like, God, they kept asking me the same questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. There's
Several
a
different
reason-
ways.
There's a reason why. Because if you're making this up, you will eventually flub up and tell me something different. And I've already got it, How many times people are like, I've already told you that. I know
Right.
you have. And you're going to tell it to me again
Mm-hmm.
and again. But these people never messed it up. And it got to the point where there was a book written and there was a made-for-TV movie starring James
Earl Jones, I know.
Right? Like, it's pretty incredible. Made
Yeah.
about it as well. So, I mean, this is why I chose this particular story, because to me, this was the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's around that time period that we're always talking about. The nuclear weapons are an issue.
Right,
which
right.
You and I, and not Steve, but maybe Emmy as well. Steve doesn't believe any of it. But you and I believe brought more attention to us.
More attention.
From them.
Yeah.
Like they knew we were here, but now all of a sudden they're like, whoa, that's a big red spot on the planet. Let's
Well,
see what's
there's
going on there.
It's interesting because that is kind of the beginning story, but I think Sisson has like
Yeah.
the beginning of the story.
Right.
Let's check it out.
Okay. Let me just grab my notes here.
And your spectacles.
He's getting
The-
sciencey.
Put on my science spectacles. All right, so the headline in this newspaper: 3 strange visitors. It's the account of Colonel H.G. Shaw of Stockton, California, and he said in it that he would not have come forward and said anything if he had been by himself, but he was with another individual, and so he kind of thought, well, I've got somebody to corroborate my story here. So I got to find the beginning of the story here. I think it starts actually here. It's a long article. He said if he wasn't alone, he probably wouldn't have said anything. But he says he went out to Lodi in a company with another gentleman, and they went to some places to get some stuff for an upcoming fair that they were going to do some exhibits, I think.
When is this? What year is this?
This is 1896.
1896.
Yeah. So a little before the Barney and Betty story. So this one, he says they were, of course, this is 1800, so this is not a car. They are in a horse and buggy situation here. He says, shortly before 6 o'clock, and we were jogging along quietly when the horse stopped suddenly and gave a snort of terror. Looking up, we beheld 3 strange beings. They resembled humans in many respects, but still they were not like anything I had ever seen. They were nearly or quite 7 feet high and very slender. We were both somewhat startled, as you may readily imagine, and the first impulse was to drive on. The horse, however, refused to budge. And when we saw that we were being regarded more with an air of curiosity than anything else, we concluded to get out and investigate. I walked up to where the strange-looking persons were and addressed them. I asked where they were from. They seemed not to understand me, but began, warbling expresses it better than talking. So I'm guessing that's kind of similar to the mumbling,
Yeah.
some sort of communication, but not discernible as language to us. He says their remarks, if such you would call them, were addressed to each other and sounded like a monotonous chant inclined to be guttural. I saw it was no use to attempt a conversation, so I satisfied myself with watching and examining them. They seemed to take great interest in ourselves, the horse and buggy, and scrutinized everything very carefully. While they were thus engaged, I was able to inspect them as well. As I've already stated, they were 7 feet in height and very slender. I noticed further that their hands were quite small and delicate, and that their fingers were without nails. Their feet, however, were nearly twice as long as those of an ordinary man, and they were narrow, and the toes were also long and slender. I noticed, too, that they were able to use their feet and toes much the same as a monkey. In fact, they appeared to have much better use of their feet than their hands. I presently discovered that this was probably a provision of nature. As one of them came close to me, I reached out to touch him, and placing my hand under his elbow, pressed gently upward, and lo and behold, I lifted him from the ground with scarcely an effort. This is actually like an interaction, like they
Yeah.
touch
Right,
each other.
Yeah.
Right.
And he says they hardly weighed anything. He said maybe an ounce, if even that. Extremely light. And he says they were without any sort of clothing, but they were covered with a natural growth hard to describe. It was not hair, neither was it like feathers, but it was as soft as silk to the touch, and their skin was like velvet. Their faces and heads were without hair, the ears were very small, and the nose had the appearance of polished ivory, while the eyes were large and lustrous. The mouth, however, was small, and it seemed to me that they were without teeth. That and other things led me to believe that they neither ate nor drank, and that life was sustained by some sort of gas. Each of them had swung under the left arm a bag to which was attached a nozzle, and every little while one or the other would place the nozzle in his mouth, at which time I heard a sound as of escaping gas. It was much the same sound as is produced by a person blowing up a football. So it's like this is their spacesuit kind of thing.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Right?
He says he didn't think that they were hideous at all. In fact, he says they were markedly the contrary. They were possessed of a strange and indescribable beauty. I can express myself in no other way. They were graceful to a degree and more divinely beautiful than anything I ever beheld. The strangest part of the story is yet to come. It is the lights they carried. Each held in his hand something about the size of a hen's egg. Upon holding them up and partially opening the hand, got to find the rest of the story here. I think it's over here.
And now the
Yeah.
rest of the story.
These substances emitted the most remarkable, intense, and penetrating light one can imagine. Notwithstanding its intensity, it had no unpleasant effect upon our eyes, and we found we could gaze directly at it. It seemed to me to be some sort of luminous material, though they had complete control of it. Finally, they became tired of examining us and our horse and buggy, and then one of them, at a signal from one who appeared to be the leader, attempted to lift me, probably with the intention of carrying me away. So, an attempted abduction,
Holy
right?
cow.
Yeah. But he couldn't lift them. It's too heavy. And each of them tried, he said, to move them and couldn't. They didn't have the strength to do it, is what he's thought. And so, they after failing to pick them up and carry them, he says, they turned in the direction of the Woodbridge Canal, near which we were, and as they flashed their lights toward the bridge, we beheld a startling sight. There, resting in the air about 20 feet above the water, was an immense airship. It was 150 feet in length at least, though probably not over 20 feet in diameter at the widest part. It was pointed at both ends, and outside a large rudder there was no visible machinery. The three walked rapidly toward the ship, not as you or I walk, but with a swaying motion, their feet only touching the ground at intervals of about 15 feet. We followed them as rapidly as possible and reached the bridge as they were about to embark. With a little spring, they rose to the machine, opened a door in the side, and disappeared within. I do not know of what the affair was built, but just before it started, I struck it with a rock and it gave no sound. It went through the air very rapidly and expanded and contracted with a muscular motion, and soon was out of sight.
A pulsing.
Yeah, like the machine
Pulsing.
itself was like flexing almost. Yeah. This was in the Evening Mail in Stockton, California. The published date was the 27th of November, 1896, but I think the account actually took place on the 19th. And what's interesting about this is it's one of many airship sightings that were in the California area through several months. The November 18th, 1896 editions of the Sacramento Bee and San Francisco Call published accounts of a sighting that had taken place the night before. So that would have been on the 17th, 1896.
More than one person saw this.
Oh, it was
Lots of people
over
saw
the
it.
series of like up to 6 months, I think. It was hot and heavy, and then nothing.
Yeah. Mystery Light reappeared over Sacramento on the evening of November 22nd. Among the observers of this one were Sacramento's deputy sheriff and district attorney. So credible people.
Credible people.
Yep.
Yeah. People not inclined to, go for any type of attention, and that wouldn't be in that position to do so. A lot of the sightings were more of a light that they couldn't figure out what it was, but some said that they would discern a dark shape behind the light. And cities all around that area of California, they saw this. Folsom, San Francisco, Oakland, Petaluma, Santa Rosa, many other cities. After November 23rd, there were more sightings: Red Bluff, Redding, Woodland, Chico, San Jose, Lodi, and lots of other areas. So, I mean, these are dozens of sightings. Of course, in lots of newspaper reports on this, people eventually came forward and claimed to represent the individual who had invented the airship, and they were just out there testing the airship. But I think a lot of the stuff was people just trying to latch onto this,
Right.
and become part of the story.
Con man.
Yeah, exactly.
Snake oil salesman.
Yep.
So clearly there's some fake news in there. Some of the accounts are probably not legitimate. There's a little tongue-in-cheek kind of flavor to it. And so I think one of them at the end of the entire account, and I'm writing this from an insane asylum. So,
Right.
I mean, it's kind of like one of those things, like right now on social media, you would see a news story of Oliver Anthony and Kid Rock are doing their You Can't Cancel America tour and outselling Taylor Swift. You know, if you look back at that 100 years from now, there's no indication that that's a fake story. Right now, we know it's not legit.
Right.
But, you know, with the passage of time, some of these may have been totally fake news, and we just got no way of determining that.
Right.
But that Colonel's story,
Yeah.
there's I would honestly believe every word that man just said.
Mhm.
Because that, first off, that's unusual. And you think about the time period that this happened, you have no idea what the hell a UFO is. You have no idea what any of this is.
Yeah, what
except maybe
aliens
an
are.
Airship, the tube,
Yeah.
the bag. Why would he even know if an alien came to Earth, they would need something?
Right. Yeah.
And the movement seems
It seems
strange,
odd.
almost like either zero gravity suits or the beings themselves are made out of such a material that we don't understand. And in our atmosphere, it's nothing.
Right.
I
Yeah.
like how they all tried to pick him up because it's almost as if like they didn't understand it either.
Yeah. Like,
Like,
what, yeah. How come
they're
you can't
like,
do this? Yeah.
How come he can do this to us?
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
can't
We
pick
can't
him
do
up.
it to him.
Yeah.
Right.
That is odd.
Yeah.
You know, like they were just passing through and they're like, hey, there's computers say that there's living things there. Let's go check them out. Well, apparently they're made of lead. But that's just really interesting that was like a really good interaction. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Where they're like, let's test things out.
And like I said, probably an attempted abduction. Like if they could have moved him, they probably
may
would
have
They probably would have taken
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was over that small period of time, dozens of sightings, and then there was a resurgence again in February of 1897, the following year, just a few months later, in Nebraska, is where this one started. Eventually, it spread through most of the Midwest through May of 1897. Much more. I mean, just pages and pages of sightings. So even as big as this stuff was, there was a much larger resurgence over the next several months and further east in the country.
That's interesting. With that resurgence, now we got to think about it. There's no electronic communication at this point.
Yeah, it would have been newspaper reports, and that's it. Word of
And
mouth
that's it.
newspapers.
And how far do newspapers go?
Right.
Right.
Especially at this time period. They're not national. They're local.
Yeah, and a lot of the national news wasn't going to report on this kind of stuff anyway.
No, not absolutely not. So you figure I would love to read those other articles and see how similar their descriptions of the object or maybe even beings were to the
Right.
colonel's.
That's what I was thinking.
You know, that
too.
way it's like, well, I had no idea that this colonel had seen it, but let me tell you what I saw and if there's any correlation.
Yeah, there was one I came across that described the power of the airship as being like men on bicycle pedals underneath it. But I think this one might have been a bit of a phony story because
Yeah.
he also heard them shouting commands, which obviously doesn't tie into the warbling.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh, you gotta get up and miss the church steeple," which there was no church steeple in the area. There was a bar though that had a point on it, so maybe they were talking about
Standing right outside
Yeah.
of the bar.
Yeah. So guess what I
Yeah.
just saw?
had a few too many, and this is what I saw. So that one I would probably not put too much weight in it.
Right,
So yeah,
right.
the other accounts may have more valuable information in them. But yeah, 1800s.
It's just interesting though because you look at that and you're like, okay, so that's late 1800s. But from then until 50s, 60s, there's not a whole lot of stories. I mean, you specifically look for something in that time frame, you're not seeing a whole lot of stuff. But you go back like to ancient paintings, and it's like, oh, you know, there's the UFO in the sky or whatever. So it's like there's this time period that's missing. Now there's UFO reports, but there's not alien abduction stories, which I find just fascinating.
Encounters of actually seeing the individuals that were on these craft. There's
Right.
almost nothing until the 60s, pretty much.
Okay, but let's really look at that time period, okay? If an alien showed up to a town, some remote farm somewhere, and abducted somebody, no one would ever know.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, Joe just went missing.
Wasn't like, well, they haven't posted on FacePace for a while. I wonder what happened.
So what I'm saying is like these things could have been happening, and they're smart enough to do them in remote areas,
Right.
Yeah.
Where, you know, maybe it wasn't amped up yet either, because they're like, well, these guys are so primitive, we don't have anything to worry about. Let's just leave them be.
And we've talked about this before, where even if it does happen, chances are a lot of people aren't going to even say anything about it.
Exactly.
Would you?
Well,
No.
which is funny because so back in the early mid 50s, they did an early study, and they said that over 1,700 people at that time claimed to have been abducted, and they think now it's as high as anywhere from 5 to 6% of the global population. Think about that number.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we got to think about how many of those are actually probably false statements, people seeking attention,
Yeah,
sure.
people suffering from some sort of mental disorder, emotional
But even
disorder.
if it's 1%,
Yeah, and I think that
half
might,
a percent, that's a lot of people.
Still a lot,
And if they have the ability to, erase the memories of stuff, then that would offset.
And
Right,
how
it's
would you
like
ever
the
know?
the Men in Black with their little thing,
Right.
right?
Well, and that's where that whole idea for the movie came
Right.
from, is that, people have come forward after suffering nightmares, and then they're like, these nightmares are just too clear.
Right.
So they come forward, and I don't know how I feel about hypnosis, so I'm going to be honest.
Yeah,
with
I think
on
you can.
that.
I think you can implant stuff. The power of suggestion is pretty strong.
Yeah,
there.
Well,
I'm a big critic
That
of
and
hypnosis.
it's you can't get away with it in court or anything
Yeah.
like that because it's just there's no proof, unfortunately, that it actually is retrieving the memories you think it is,
Yeah.
like real memories versus made up ones.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the hard part about hypnosis.
Yes.
But since we're on the subject of hypnosis, I'd like to talk about this man.
Tell me about this man.
So I don't have an abduction story. I have a story about a man who likes to listen to them. So
Okay.
our Leo Sprinkle was born in Rocky Ford, Colorado in 1930. He is a really well-educated man. He went to the Colorado University in Boulder, earned his BA in psychology, education, sociology, and history. And past that, he went on to many universities as well. He also served in the U.S. Army in Germany from 1952 to 1954. He then ended up settling in the University of Wyoming.
I knew it.
hey. Love it.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Local boy.
Yes.
He was the counseling psychologist or he settled in the University of Wyoming as the counseling psychologist and psychology from 1964 to 1989, which I believe that's when he retired. He also later became the director of that department. So just a very well-educated man, and he has made groundbreaking, pioneering research in investigating UFO abductions. So I just thought he'd be really cool. So he started doing the research about UFO abductions around the mid-1960s.
Around the time when they started to really
Yeah,
pop
a
up around the
lot
country.
more.
Yep,
Yes,
yep.
yes. And think about his specialized stuff in psychology and everything like that. 'Cause
Is this
that
person seeking attention?
Yes.
Is this trauma resurfacing?
That's a very niche market at the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right, yeah.
And so he actually took special interest in concentrating on UFO contactee experiences. So people that have made contact with aliens.
Mhm.
But he also had, just a baseline research or interest in researching UFOs, ESP, hypnosis, reincarnation, spiritual emergence, and counseling theory and practice. So he kind of, wants to know how the brain works, but he
Ran the
also
gambit.
likes aliens.
Yeah.
So
It's a good combination, really. I mean,
Well,
it really
I
is.
think-
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fascinating. That's one of my things is if I woke up one day and I was like, okay, I've had nightmares. I feel like maybe I've been abducted.
abducted, yes.
I would seek out a mental professional first and foremost, and I would have scans done. I would go through everything medically. God forbid, like a tumor can make you hallucinate.
Yeah, I think
Sure,
with,
right.
with my skepticism, that's the direction I would definitely
I
go.
would think I've got And
Well, and the good thing about him is he just was very open-minded about it all.
Yeah.
People wanted to talk to him because he wasn't going to sit there and judge them the whole time
Right.
for
Not
having
poo-poo them.
having a contact experience with extraterrestrials. So,
in a time when the government, after the completion of Project Blue Book, essentially said, no, you're all crazy.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's why a lot of people probably didn't feel comfortable,
Right.
talking
ruin
about
your
their
reputation.
talking about their experiences,
And
because
even-
suddenly you're labeled a nut.
In the 1800s, a lot of the newspaper stories were mocking these people that had seen stuff, calling them drunks and whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's funny because, I mean, and we've mentioned this several times, that up until just a few years ago, if you even mentioned UFOs, there was a whole lot of people that were like, "Oh, tinfoil hat wearing weirdo."
Yeah.
Rolling of the
And then
eyes. Yeah.
now it's not.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
and
more mainstream.
yeah, now you've got Congress going, well, what's happening?
Yeah,
Right.
having official hearings on this.
I mean, the thing of it is, a lot of people want to say this is disclosure. We've talked about that on this program a few times, how much I hope it really is. I honestly do hope that even as soon as tomorrow, they show up and they're like, hey, you guys have come a long way. You're starting to reach out there a little farther than you're supposed to. Let's have a conversation about who's who in our neighborhood now and how long we've been watching you. Aaron, what did you find?
Well, I found several different things, but so you go.
I'm sorry, were you done?
Oh no,
I'm not finished.
Oh,
she's not done.
My bad. My
Sorry.
bad.
Dude.
My bad.
So the fascination that he had may have come from a personal contact experience that he had. I have no concrete evidence of that, but it was mentioned in some of the stuff I've seen. So I don't know if he actually did have that or not.
So he didn't just randomly decide to get in that
He
field.
Yeah.
may
He had
have
some-
been either abducted
Yeah.
or contacted,
Yes.
which led him down this
this
path.
interest, yeah.
You want to know what's funny? You talk to a lot of psychologists, and they will actually say, I got into psychology to figure out what was wrong
Yeah.
with me.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Very common.
But
Yeah.
here's a little bit more on him. Is he was the first to suggest a link between abductions and cattle mutilations
Oh.
as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
Oh,
And
interesting.
eventually, he did come to believe that he had been abducted by aliens in his youth. And in 1989, he was forcibly removed from his job.
Oh my gosh, I did not know that. I
Yeah.
did not find that.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
horrible.
he got
Yeah.
kicked out of the University of Wyoming for being a wacko. That
Or-
takes some doing.
Well,
Yeah, it does.
I will tell you. So, a lot of the information I found on him was actually through his obituary, like
Yeah.
his education and everything. That's where I found that. And I mean, it was a obituary page, and the comments were so heartwarming on the bottom of it with their people's personal experiences with him.
Yep.
They loved him, and if it was someone he was counseling, if it was someone, he listened to their story. Students, I mean, he has really great, people say great things about him. And I listened to a brief moment of a podcast with him, and he seemed like he'd be a fun teacher.
Right?
Like, he is kind of a goofy guy, but he seems to me like an empath at the same time. Like,
Yeah.
he understands when the humor is appropriate, when it's not, but also like he understands people on a deeper level. So,
Well, and when
Very
you
cool.
go around having this traumatic experience happening to you, and everyone in any kind of official title looks at you and says, "It didn't. You're
Right.
just crazy,
Right.
Mhm.
and we don't want to hear your story. We don't really care that much." How horrible is that to hear time and time and time
And then
again?
the first guy that does listen to you, you're like, oh, thank God.
Absolutely.
Like, I just need to get this off my
Mhm.
chest.
Sometimes
Exactly.
just talking about it
Right.
helps out. I mean, anybody in therapy knows that. Like, honestly, just talking about it gets it off your chest, and you can walk around the next day, whereas before you're carrying this massive weight.
Right.
So you've got one guy, probably at the time, maybe 1, 2, possibly 3 in the entire nation, who would sit down and talk to you about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
and then just real quick, you might have it in your notes too, but he was either a founder or just a very important part in the success of the UFO conferences held in Laramie every year.
Oh,
Okay.
I didn't
Yeah.
know.
I didn't know that.
I would love to attend one of those.
Oh, man.
He also spoke with, do you
That might be
remember
dangerous.
that local case we did when we did all the local
Absolutely,
abductions?
I do. Yep.
With the straw hair and everything. I think the name was
Old Chisel Hand.
Yes, Chisel Hand. But, I think his name was McGuire. Him and Leo spoke.
Oh, I absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's wrote many books. If anyone wants to read any of the accounts that people have given him and everything. He has written many books that are, available just online and everything. So if you want to do more research on him, that would be my advice, because it's actually very hard to find things on him specifically online. But he's got a lot of papers, a lot of books. He's been on a lot of TV talk shows and everything like that. So
one of the founding fathers of the UFO community, sounds like.
Yeah.
Yes.
Especially in this area, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then we have Antonio Villas Boas.
Banderas.
Yeah, right? So he was a Brazilian farmer, and he had claimed that he was abducted by extraterrestrials in 1957. So the reason I like this is because all the rest of these stories are very American stories at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so when I stumbled across this one, I was like, ooh, okay, same hemisphere, but
It does kind of seem that English-speaking countries have more of these than others.
Right.
At least reports of them.
And I don't know why that is, if it's just more remote in Brazil. So like back in the 1800s, they can go down there, snag some people from the Amazon, take off, nobody knows.
No one,
Or-
the popular.
Maybe it's the media bubble that the United States has
That-
around
yeah.
Well,
it, too.
yeah.
that could be too. But so he claims that he was abducted, but a similar story had circulated around that area for a number of years. So a lot of skeptics said it's a hoax. He just has way more detail than what the other story had. But he alleged that he was abducted on October 15th, 1957. He was plowing fields near São Francisco de Sales, wherever that is, when he described what he saw as a giant red star in the night sky. And the story goes that the star approached his position, not unlike kind of Barney and Betty, that it got closer to him, growing in size until it became recognizable as roughly circular or egg-shaped aerial craft
Pancake.
with a red light at its front and a rotating cupola on top.
Oh,
So
yeah.
again, we got the red lights
rotating thing.
and we got the rotation, which I think is incredible, because I guarantee you, at the time this went on, Barney and Betty never heard this story.
No. Yeah.
This guy
Yeah.
had never heard of them.
Yeah. Yep.
Too many worlds apart, realistically.
Mm-hmm.
Craft descended in the field, landed, extended 3 legs. Classic.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, Boaz decided to run from the scene. He tried to do it on his tractor, but the
At
lights
least
and
he
engine
tried
died.
to run, man.
Right, but the lights and engine died. So what happened when they recounted their story was, he said, we tried to get out of there and the car died.
Yep.
They're always dying.
Yeah.
Watches are dying. Mechanical things break down.
They
Yeah.
can
in
shut
these.
something down.
Somehow, yeah.
So he only made it a short distance, so he continued on foot. But he was seized by a 5-foot tall humanoid that was wearing a gray coverall type outfit and a helmet. So again, they had these caps on that looked like bells, whatever. Very similar stories. The eyes were small and blue, and instead of speech, it made noises like barking or yelps. 3 similar beings then joined in to subdue him, dragged him inside the craft, and once inside the craft, he was stripped of all of his clothes and covered from head to toe with a strange jelly.
Oh.
He got slimed.
Mm-hmm. So they led him into a large semicircular room through a doorway that had strange red symbols all over it. He was able to memorize those symbols and later reproduce them for investigators. But in the room, the beings took samples of his blood from his chin, oddly enough.
That's an odd place.
Right?
That'd hurt
Right,
like hell.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Then-
simple.
Yeah. Then they took him to a third room and left him for about an hour, as far as he could tell. Then some kind of gas was pumped into the room, which made him become violently ill. Shortly after, he claimed he was joined in the room by another humanoid. This one, however, female.
And fine.
He says she was very attractive
Of course.
and
fine.
very naked.
Oh.
She was about the same height as the other beings, with a small pointed chin and large blue cat-like eyes. The hair on her head was long and white, kind of platinum blonde, but her underarm and pubic region hair were bright red. He said he felt a strong attraction to the quote-unquote woman.
Best abduction ever.
And the two copulated.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and during this act, I found this interesting too, Boas noted that the female did not kiss him, but instead was over and over nipping him on the chin. A lot of chin talk in this.
What is with the chin?
Yeah, this.
I believe the abduction, but I think this last part was just for the boys. Just threw this last part in.
She just
My
nibbling on
question
my
was,
chin.
didn't we just talk about how he was violently ill in the same room?
Yeah.
And now he's messing around
But they took the blood from his chin. So is she like drinking his blood? Or is she just like they got a chin thing? Hey.
Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder.
Don't kink
Google
shame.
that. So when it was all over, the female smiled at him, rubbed her belly, and gestured upwards. Boas took this to mean that she was going to raise their child in space. He then said that he was actually angered by the situation because he felt as though he had been little more than a quote-unquote good stallion for the humanoids.
Trust me, it's all for the research.
Right, exactly. He was then given his clothes back, taken on a tour of the ship, and during the tour, he attempted to take a clock-like device as proof of the encounter, but he was caught by the humanoids and prevented from doing so. He was then escorted off the ship and watched as it took off, glowing brightly. When he returned home, he had discovered that 4 hours had passed.
Wow.
He actually, later on in life, became a lawyer, was married, and had 4 children, plus the star child.
Yes.
Let's not forget that. And he stuck to the story his entire life.
Yeah.
But here's the crazy thing. So he's down in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
They're up in America. Those guys are out in California in the 1800s. Every story, though, it seems like it goes capture, examination or process, the probing, conference, talking with them, whatever that is, whether you're
Attempted
talking or telepathy or the barks and chirps or the mumbling, whatever, a tour. And you recall Travis Walton said they took me to all these different places, whatever, loss of time, the return. All of them also have like this overwhelming sense of love for things when they get back, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Because whether it triggers that response in them, like, oh my gosh, I'm home. That was so scary. I'm going to tell everybody what I, really feel about them. I love them. And then dealing with the aftermath. It's like that's the same pattern. So I got to thinking about conversations Sisson and I have had and we've had on the show. Is that the just ethereal human brain? Because they're all pretty much similar. It doesn't matter where you are. So it's always this timeline? Or is this like the abduction handbook? Like, okay, well, capture them, then do some things with them, but then, communicate with them and take them on a tour, make them feel better.
I'm guessing the fornication is the optional part of it.
Yeah, I think there's different checklists dependent upon which,
they're gonna see
Star series you come out
see
of.
you with your pants down though at one point. That's on the checklist.
There's probing or intercourse, something. Yeah.
I'm telling you, man, that last part was just for the boys.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I got the best part. Wait, I got.
Check this out, guys.
And it was chin nibbling.
And I lasted for 4 hours.
Right.
I discovered I really like that chin nibbling. Could you just nibble it just a little bit?
It's just
Take
weird.
me back there.
It's just weird. And really, if you look at it from 50s, 60s moving forward, we got Travis in the 70s, right? And we've got a couple other people that have come out with some pretty fantastic stories, but not a whole lot. Not a whole lot, especially in this age of communication.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
There aren't, like, if it was as prominent as even 1% of the world population, where are those stories?
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. It's still, a lot of people are going to look at you and be like, you're insane.
Right.
And I couldn't say I wouldn't be one of them.
Yeah.
But
is it, maybe
it
that's
depends.
it, though, is it's like, okay, this is not something that I want to die on that hill on a social media platform and have people tear you apart.
Yeah, and just think of all the attention you would bring to yourself. Everybody, these tabloids and everything are just going to constantly be bothering you. So,
right.
Yeah, if you just think about it for a moment, you're like, I don't want any of that. I'm just going to keep it to myself.
Not at all.
Thinking about a lot of people, and I feel like the easiest spot to do all this would be the country.
Right.
Country people like to keep to themselves.
What
That's
better
just the
way
it is.
if you were of that philosophy to become insta famous? Whether it was good or bad, that would be something that could make you famous overnight. If you had
infamous.
a really good story, well,
you could make a
exactly.
30-part TikTok.
Well, and the funny
and
thing,
make everyone go to each part.
Right. Yeah. Right. Every single one.
well, the other side of it is, I'm like, okay, so you had very few stories back in the day, and then all of a sudden, all of them were like 50s, 60s, 70s. Why? When was Roswell?
Yeah.
July 8th, 1947.
Yeah.
Prior to that, UFOs, right? Drop the nukes. Now tons of UFOs. But after 47, we collect aliens and we do experiments on them. So mental telepathy, the alien that's being experimented on, is like, guys, these people are crazy. They're like taking blood samples, taking tissue samples. What are we going to do? And they're like, we'll do the same thing. And it's only a few years later that becomes a thing. So was it that they were just they came here, give us technology, build pyramids, do the stuff, whatever, and then we're just kind of hands off, and then they go, ooh, they got nuclear bombs. That's scary. Wait a minute. They're dissecting Fred. Gloves are off. Let's go snake some people and probe them and see what's up.
I think it's because...
Did they probe Fred?
Oh, I bet some scientist here probed Fred.
Sorry.
We got to
Interrupted
know
you.
the orifices.
Yes.
No, you guarantee that definitely happened.
Proby wants to know.
If
Probably
you
wants
want
to
the
know.
truth, like biologists actually classify certain life forms on when your orifices are developed in fertilization or in development.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So they're important biologically. So like, yeah, I mean, if we really look at it, probing's funny, but it's important. I hate to say it, but it is. But
Get your prostate checked, everyone. It's important.
if you look
But it is,
at
though.
the abduction timeline, so let's look at the story that Steve brought forward today. That those individuals actually acted like they accidentally came across this planet,
Right.
where they're like, "Holy crap, man!
What
didn't
is
even
all
know-
this?
What is all?
Yeah, the
like, they're curious.
curiosity.
They're not hiding themselves. I mean, they're standing out there on the road. And these, this horse and buggy come up and they interacted. They looked around, and then finally, yo, guys, we got that lunch date. And then they all
Right.
take off, jump in their ship, and go. I mean, hell, the colonel even threw a rock at him.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they're like, what the hell is that thing doing? God, he's fat. Let's go. I couldn't.
We can't carry him.
Pick him up. And they fly off. Like that seemed like a genuine, curious group of scientists looking at things. Like he noted how curious they were about stuff and took advantage of it. We move after World War II, when we started to drop and test nuclear weapons, to them taking us on board and inspecting us. I believe it's because they are going, what the hell are they doing to themselves? I want to know. Are these things causing mutations in their DNA? Where are those mutations? Is this nuclear fallout spreading so far over their planet that they're essentially destroying themselves on the cellular level? I want to know. And maybe it's more than one. Maybe it's more than one species, more than one organization, more than one race of aliens that are like, let's go down, we'll take a couple, because you need a control group and you need a lot of samples to determine, a correlation or that something's gone wrong. And you're going to need them from all over the world because they let off nuclear weapons here, but they didn't over here. They did this here, but they didn't over there. There are reports that the United States government alleged reports, were letting off nuclear weapons underground around Arizona and New Mexico. Then cows started to turn up missing reproductive organs and the tongue.
The tongue.
Yeah.
Yep.
What are the softest parts of the body?
Yep.
The tongue, the eyes, and the reproductive organs. So a lot of people wanted to say, well, these are aliens taking these cows, doing this surgery. I heard rumors it was special forces going in there, taking these body parts from the cows to scientists to test them so that they didn't do it to people. Because if the government had accidentally, in their tests, contaminated the water in that area, it's going to affect your soft parts first and your reproductive organs. So if I was a scientist, I would basically be sitting back going, did we contaminate our own people years ago by performing these tests? Well, we can't invite them in here.
Right. Can't be found out.
And we can't just go around cutting people's cows up.
Right.
So
But the aliens could do it.
The aliens could do it.
Yeah.
And we could let the UFO community take that and run with it, and I'll get my results.
But I think the UFOs were doing that. And they were just using that as their clever cover story. Because there's some cattle mutilation things that are just absolutely bizarre.
And I'm not saying that's all of it. Maybe the government knew that the cattle mutilations were going on.
Right.
And they're like, we could use this as a
cover story.
We'd just go in there, we'll get these things and be done with that.
Yeah.
And we all know that the government has done some nefarious stuff like that in the past.
What? No.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's the idea. I believe there are alien abductions. Testing, and we don't know their policies and procedures.
Yeah, they may have different ones depending on what group's involved.
I mean, God, when you think about aliens, we're talking alien, man. Remove any thought process that you know about from your head right now, because their planet's different. They evolve differently. Their biology's completely different. We understand nothing. What if all of these things are not multiple beings, but one being connected through a hive mind?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But they share one consciousness. We don't know if they do or not. I mean, I don't know.
But what do we do every time we find something? We've talked about that too.
You test the hell out of it.
Take it apart. See how it works. Whether it's a living creature or a cell phone. You know, I mean, that's what we do. For science. And that's what we do. That's what they would do. So they show up and they're like, wait a minute. Oxygen breathers? We got to get to the bottom of this.
Look inside that and see how that thing works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you would. And you'd study their society, because you know, a civilization that advanced has anthropologists.
Oh, absolutely.
And they want to know what the hell's going on.
See, so it brings it around to, what do you think? Is it fact or crap? Do you think there's alien abductions? Easy for me to say. I think it's fact. I think there's enough stories out there and enough consistencies between those stories of people that don't know each other or haven't heard those stories, that it's too much to just kind of throw out without actually saying, okay, there's something to this. So I'm going to go fact instead of crap on this one.
I'm going to, if everyone's good, I'm going to chime in on the last word on this.
Yeah.
When it comes to alien abductions, I want you guys to think about the ones that we don't know about. I want you to think about the ones that the government has such overwhelming evidence about that they have to keep it quiet. The people who go to the government and the government doesn't share it. The countless individuals that could have stepped forward a long time ago, and to protect them and to protect that there's aliens, the government just doesn't release it. We're just not going to talk about it. We're not going to put this into the UFO community. We're going to keep this quiet. We're going to keep your identity a secret. I think there are enough convincing stories, like you said, Aaron, but I also believe that there's much more convincing evidence that the government keeps hidden to protect itself, the secret, and the people. Because if I was abducted by aliens and I remembered the event, I would go to the military and I would say, who do I need to talk to? Because this happened. Call me crazy, but let me tell my story and I'll leave. scan me, make sure they didn't put anything in me,
Mm.
and I'll call it a day.
Yep.
And you keep it quiet, and I'll keep it quiet. And that would be the route that I took. But alien abductions, man, whether you believe them or not, I can tell you that people believe that they have been. And that's enough for me to take pause. You've been watching Jackalopes Explore.
They're coming for the children.
Our Brazilian friend should have, instead of grabbing a clock, should have got a hair sample.